I'm a 28-year-old guy, and 3 years ago, I lost my mom after a long battle with illness. She was the heart of our home, calm, patient, and steady. Even when things were tough, she was the one who held everything together. My dad is 61. He was completely crushed after she passed. He barely spoke, didn't eat properly, and spent most of his days sitting in the living room staring at the same spot on the wall. For the first year, the house felt frozen in time, like we were all waiting for her to walk back in. About a year after she died, my dad started seeing someone new, Clara. She's 59. At first, I was relieved. He was starting to talk more, go out, even laugh sometimes. When he mentioned he'd met someone, I actually encouraged him. I thought maybe he was finally finding some peace again. My sister, who's 25, was more cautious. She told me she had a bad feeling, but I chalked it up to her being overprotective. Clara was introduced to us slowly. She'd come by for Sunday dinners and made a show of being respectful, asking questions about mom, complimenting the house. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, but less than 6 months after they met, Clara moved into our family home, the one where every photo, piece of furniture, and corner held a memory of mom. Almost immediately, she started making changes. The hallway cabinet that used to display my mom's teacup collection was emptied and replaced with modern vases and candles. She painted over the soft yellow walls with beige and gray tones, and the living room furniture was swapped out for sleek pieces that didn't match anything else in the house. She claimed she was cleansing the energy and helping the house breathe again. The problem was, everything she replaced had my mom's fingerprints on it. The first time I noticed something was really off was during a visit when I couldn't find the framed photo of my parents on their wedding day. It used to sit on the fireplace mantel. I checked around and found a few other photos of mom missing too. My sister found some of her old keepsakes shoved into an unlabeled box in the hall closet. Things like handwritten notes, mom's favorite brooch, little things we thought would always have a place in that home. When we asked Clara about it, she brushed it off and said keeping relics from the past was unhealthy. She told us the house should reflect the current woman of the home, not someone who wasn't here anymore. My dad stood next to her and didn't say much, but when pressed, he just said Clara meant well and wanted to contribute in her own way. That was the start of a steady decline. Things came to a head during a family dinner with some extended relatives. Clara raised her glass and toasted to new beginnings and then called herself the new matriarch of the family. Everyone went quiet. My sister looked at me across the table, and I could tell she was trying not to say anything. Clara didn't stop there. A few days later, she asked if we would start calling her mom or at least stepmom. This was strange, not just because of the timing, but also because she and our dad weren't even engaged or married. I told her clearly that wasn't going to happen. I said I only had one mom and no one could replace her. She looked hurt but said she just wanted to feel like part of the family. That might have been easier to believe if she hadn't been systematically erasing every trace of the woman who had built that family. The most shocking part was that some of our aunts and uncles actually agreed with her. They started repeating things like let love in and your mother would want you to move forward. I didn't understand how they couldn't see the difference between moving forward and bulldozing over everything that mattered. Then came the jewelry. Clara asked my dad to pack away my mom's jewelry because it was residual sadness. My sister and I didn't even know it had been touched until we visited one weekend and opened the vanity drawers. All the necklaces, rings, bracelets, gone. My dad said he didn't think it was important anymore and needed space for Clara's things. That was it for me. I didn't yell, didn't fight. I just looked around the house that used to feel like home and realized I didn't recognize it anymore. Clara's decorations were everywhere. Her scent, her voice, her choices. My mom's presents had been shoved into closets, boxes, and drawers. I told my dad I needed some space and started visiting less. My sister did the same. It wasn't a dramatic exit. It was quiet, but it felt like a line had been crossed that couldn't be undone. We weren't just losing our mom again. We were being asked to pretend she'd never existed. It had been 4 months since I last stepped foot in my father's house. I'm 28, and my sister is 25. We both agreed we needed some space after everything that had happened with Clara. But a few weeks ago, my father reached out and mentioned he had some of our mother's books boxed up, including the old family cookbook we'd used growing up. My sister wanted it for a dinner she was planning, so we decided to stop by and pick it up. The moment I stepped through the front door, I knew something had changed. Completely. There wasn't a single trace of my mother left. The photos that used to line the walls, her graduation picture, her framed embroidery, even the quilt she hand-stitched during her treatment, gone. Every surface was cleared and replaced with generic decor. Candles, abstract art, glass bowls with fake fruit. The hallway, which used to have a portrait of my parents from their 25th anniversary, now featured a massive framed picture of Clara and my dad on a beach, posing with cocktails in hand. It was their recent vacation photo. She was in a bright red dress, smiling like she owned the place. My sister and I went straight to the kitchen to look for the cookbook. It wasn't in the usual cabinet, so we started checking some of the boxes in the pantry. Nothing. We moved to the garage, where old storage bins had been pushed into a corner. That's when my sister noticed a white plastic trash bag half tucked behind some shelves. She pulled it open and froze. Inside was our mother's wedding dress, folded, wrinkled, and stuffed next to a pair of broken lamps. She didn't say anything, just pulled the bag out and placed it on the floor like it was something fragile. We brought the bag into the living room. Clara was there, rearranging some decorative pillows. When she saw the dress, she looked confused and said she had been reorganizing things and didn't realize it was that important. She said old garments like that didn't need to be preserved like relics. I told her we weren't talking about clutter. We were talking about our mother's wedding dress. My father walked in right after and tried to smooth things over, but Clara wouldn't leave the room. Every time I tried to speak to him alone, she stepped in and added her commentary. She repeated the same thing my father had said in the past, something about how the house was filled with ghosts and how letting go was part of healing. She said the dead should be celebrated quietly, not idolized daily, and that her intentions were being misunderstood. I told her point blank that erasing someone's presence wasn't healing, it was rewriting history. That conversation didn't go well. Clara started raising her voice, saying we were treating her like she didn't belong, that no matter what she did, we would never accept her. My father stood there quiet, not taking a side, just nodding as if keeping the peace was more important than the truth. I told them that no one would ever replace our mother and that Clara trying to step into that role was never going to work. Then we left. A few days later, my sister called me. She had stopped by to grab a few books from the living room shelf and noticed something missing. The scrapbook. Our mother had started it during her illness, filling it with recipes, old letters, hospital bracelets, and notes she wrote to us. It had been there since the day she passed. We looked everywhere, bookshelves, closets, storage boxes, but it was gone. We confronted my dad through a phone call. He hesitated, then admitted Clara had probably thrown it out. She had been going through the shelves and thought it was just another old binder. I asked him how something that personal could be mistaken for garbage. He said she didn't know what it was, and it wasn't done with bad intentions. That was when I made the decision. I told my dad I wouldn't be coming back to the house while Clara was still treating our mother's memory like a mess she needed to clean up. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't scream, I just stated it clearly and left it at that. The next week, I started getting phone calls and texts from relatives, cousins, uncles, even one of my mom's old friends. They called me ungrateful. They said my father had suffered enough and that Clara was helping him rebuild. One message read, "You're punishing your father for falling in love again." Another said, "You need to grow up and let go." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I started going through old storage bins I'd taken with me when I moved out years ago. I pulled out the photo albums, my mom's old camcorder tapes, handwritten recipes, and framed notes. I spent the next several days sorting through everything, making backups, and locking them away in storage containers where no one could get to them but me and my sister. I knew now that her memory wasn't safe in that house anymore. So I stopped attending family dinners. I declined birthday invites. I didn't explain myself. I just quietly pulled away. If my mother was being erased one piece at a time, then I was going to save whatever was left before it disappeared too. About 2 weeks after my last visit to my father's house, a friend from our old neighborhood reached out. She told me she'd noticed my mother's memorial posts disappearing from her social media page, photos, captions, old birthday tributes, all wiped clean. At first, I thought maybe there was a glitch, but then I checked it myself. The account was still active, but half the content was gone. Posts my mother had written during her treatment, comments from people she hadn't spoken to in years, pictures from family vacations. It had all been deleted. I checked the login activity and saw that the account had been accessed just a few days earlier from my father's home network. I contacted him directly to ask about it. He said Clara had been helping him clean up old things and asked if it was really such a big deal. I didn't answer. Instead, I logged into every shared legacy account my mother had, Facebook, Instagram, even her old email, and started locking them down. I changed all the passwords, enabled two-step verification, and removed every unfamiliar device. My sister helped, but it was too late for most of it. The damage was done. Her photos and posts were permanently deleted, not archived. A few days later, Clara hosted a brunch at my father's house. It was called a new family tradition. My sister got an invite, but I didn't. She forwarded it to me out of curiosity. The card was custom printed, cream-colored with floral trim. At the bottom it read, "Hosted with love by matriarch Clara." We both knew it wasn't going to be anything good, but she insisted on going just to see what was happening. The house looked different again, more plants, new art pieces, and a massive decorative tree decal in the dining room. The leaves had names on them. Clara's name was at the center, branching out in gold. My mother's name was nowhere, not a single mention. Clara stood near the buffet table, smiling, passing out cards welcoming everyone to the first of many gatherings celebrating family healing and legacy. The decorations were all about her and my father, pictures from their travels, group photos with distant cousins, and framed quotes about new beginnings. I didn't see one photo of my mother, not one. I walked over to my sister, who looked like she was barely holding it together. We didn't say anything to anyone, we just turned and left. On the way out, I noticed the old cabinet in the hallway had been replaced with a modern glass shelf holding books on mindfulness and a framed sign that said "Gratitude starts today." That evening, my father sent a text saying Clara was trying to bring the family together and that she deserved respect. I didn't reply right away. When I did, I wrote that I wasn't going to be part of anything where my mother's presence was edited out to make room for someone else. I told him I wouldn't attend any event, dinner, or gathering where Clara was trying to redefine the past. The next morning, Clara sent multiple messages and emails. I immediately blocked her on everything, phone, email, social media, making sure there was no further contact possible. I wanted the boundary to be clear. After that, she started using my cousin to pass messages. He called and said Clara was hurt and just wanted to be accepted. I blocked him too. I sent a message to the rest of the family group chat. It was simple and direct. I let them know I wasn't open to reconciliation attempts. I wasn't angry. I was done. Later that week, my sister showed up at my place with a suitcase. She said she couldn't stay at our father's house anymore. Clara had started redecorating our mother's old room. The bedspread was changed. The furniture was rearranged. All the old photo frames had been swapped out with generic artwork. She didn't argue or try to fight it. She just packed a few things and left. We decided to start working on something that could last. We pulled out all the old photos we had, printed ones, digital ones, saved voicemails, handwritten notes, postcards, letters our mother used to slip into our backpacks. We scanned and saved everything. I bought a small safe for the physical items and uploaded the digital ones to a locked drive that only the two of us could access. We didn't tell anyone we were doing it. We didn't ask for help. We knew that if we kept anything tied to our father's house or Clara's influence, it wouldn't stay safe for long, so we kept it private, password protected, and completely separate. Every few nights we'd add something new to the collection: a birthday card, a photo from school events, a clip of her singing while cooking. None of it was big or dramatic, but it was ours, and it was untouched. That's when it became clear. Even digital memories weren't safe anymore if we left them in the wrong hands. So we stopped hoping people would understand, and we started building a version of the past that no one else could erase. A cousin reached out with an update we hadn't seen coming. Clara was planning a dinner in memory of our mother, not a mention of it from our father. No invite, no message, no input requested from either me or my sister. We knew it wasn't going to be right, but the idea of Clara hosting something like that without even letting us know made us uneasy. My sister and I agreed to go, not to participate, but just to witness what was being done in our mother's name. The dinner was held at a small event space downtown. As soon as we walked in, it was clear what the real focus was. The entrance was lined with photos not of our mother, but of Clara and my father, smiling in vineyards, dancing at a cousin's wedding, laughing during a beach trip. Centered on the main table was a printed program titled From Grief to Growth, a celebration of renewal. Not a single picture or memory of our mother was visible. My sister glanced at me but didn't say a word. The tables were decorated with soft gold cloth and candles. Clara stood at the front of the room holding a microphone, smiling like it was a birthday party. She spoke about healing, rebuilding, and how she had brought balance and renewal to a broken family. She called herself the family's second chance. People clapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I waited until the clapping stopped, then spoke directly and clearly. I reminded everyone the dinner was supposed to be about honoring my mother. I pointed out that there were no photos of her, no mention of her, and that this wasn't a tribute. It was a rewrite. Clara went silent for a moment, then tears. She said she was doing her best and felt disrespected, despite trying to bring everyone together. Some relatives, including an uncle, moved to console her. He turned to me and said it was time to put the past behind and support the woman who was keeping the family from falling apart. Before I could respond, Clara pulled out a new item, what she called the updated family album. It was a hardcover photo book filled with curated images. She passed it around proudly. When it reached our table, we flipped through it. Not a single photo of our mother, pages of Clara and our father. Childhood photos of us had been cropped to remove our mother's face. Family vacations where she was replaced with group photos edited to look more recent. I handed it back without a word. My sister stood up and walked out. I followed her and drove her home. Neither of us said anything during the ride. It didn't need to be discussed. We both understood what that event really was. The next morning, my father dropped off a box at my apartment. Inside were 3 albums and a letter. The albums had more of the same. Group pictures where my mother had been removed. Some photos that were clearly altered. There were captions added in handwriting that wasn't mine, or my sister's. I didn't even open the rest. I placed everything back in the box, sealed it, and sent a short message to my father. I told him plainly, our mother's memory was not up for editing, discussion, or negotiation. Later that day, I heard from a friend who was still in a private family group chat that Clara had created without us. She sent screenshots. Clara had been sharing the altered photos and stories under headings like Healing Through Unity. One picture showed her holding a brooch that used to belong to my mother. The caption read, Inherited Grace. I didn't react publicly. Neither did my sister. But the message was clear. Clara was now rewriting everything. Digital, visual, emotional. A few days later, one of our aunts messaged me directly. She said that our mother would have wanted peace, and that maybe we should try to see Clara's efforts as an act of love. I didn't reply. Instead, my sister and I quietly began preparing something of our own. We organized a small home gathering, just a few close friends who had known our mother well. No speeches, no programs, just photos, home videos, her old playlists in the background, and a simple meal she used to make on Sundays. We didn't call it anything. It wasn't a protest. It was something personal and private the way our mother would have wanted it. A few days after that, we went to the cemetery. We brought new flowers and cleaned the area around the headstone. There was already a bouquet there, placed recently. A large white arrangement with a thick purple ribbon. The words on the ribbon read, Your journey continues through me. My sister didn't say anything. She just took the bouquet, moved it to the side, and placed our own flowers in the center. We stood there for a while, then left without speaking to anyone. We both knew it wouldn't stop here, but we also knew we were done staying silent. The memory of our mother wasn't something to be redesigned. It wasn't something to be passed down like a dress or a ring. It was hers, and now it was ours to protect. About a month after the dinner Clara hosted, my sister and I received a joint email from my father's attorney. It was labeled as a courtesy notice regarding a revised draft of my father's will. We weren't sure why we were getting it, since neither of us had ever been involved in estate matters before, but we opened it anyway. What we saw made everything that had happened so far feel like a warm-up. The new draft named Clara as the sole medical proxy and executor of the estate. It also granted her shared ownership of the house and access to any remaining joint assets. My sister and I were mentioned briefly by name, in a footnote, but not given any actual authority or responsibility. We wouldn't have any say over what happened to our mother's possessions, her personal items, or even her final keepsakes. Every meaningful decision would go through Clara. I contacted my father immediately and asked to meet face to face. We chose a neutral spot, a coffee shop near his office. When I asked him directly about the changes, he acted like it was a formality. He said Clara had proven herself as a dependable partner and that this was about preparing for the future. He told me he trusted her completely. I asked him if this was leading somewhere. He paused, then told me they planned to marry in a small ceremony in the next couple of months. He said they had kept it quiet because they didn't want interference. Not long after that, Clara made the engagement public. She posted a photo of herself wearing a diamond ring standing on my parents' old porch, with the caption, "The future Mrs. Last Name has arrived." The timing wasn't a coincidence. It went up before my father had even told the rest of the family. My sister called him, trying one last time to reason through it. She told him this wasn't just about his relationship, it was about how everything connected to our mother was being handed over to someone else. He said that we were making Clara feel alienated and that she was only trying to build something new. After that, I contacted a lawyer. I wanted to understand exactly what this revised will meant and what options existed to protect our mother's legacy. The attorney walked me through the details, how executor rights could influence everything from property access to charity donations to digital files. I made a list of every personal item, photo, journal, or letter of my mother's that was still legally part of that estate. A few days later, Clara sent me a handwritten letter in the mail. She used soft language and talked about unity, healing, and letting love in. The last line read, "Your mother would have thanked me for carrying her light forward." I didn't reply. I shredded the letter and permanently blocked her number from my phone. She had no way to contact me anymore. The next morning, a message came from my father's phone. It was clearly from Clara. The tone was overly apologetic. She said she had crossed lines but wanted a clean slate. I replied with just one sentence, "Do not contact me again." Then I followed it with a message to my father, this time firm and direct. I told him if Clara spoke on his behalf again, I would involve legal counsel to enforce communication limits. After that, I started compiling everything. Copies of every letter, email, photo alteration, legal change, message from family members, even screenshots of Clara's social posts that referenced her legacy. I scanned them, stored them in encrypted folders, and made multiple backups. My sister did the same on her end. We weren't waiting for things to blow up anymore. We were preparing in advance. We began outlining which parts of our mother's estate could be contested, how digital content could be locked down legally, and how any public use of her name, photos, or writings would need to be challenged immediately. We listed out which relatives had shown loyalty to Clara and which still respected the truth of what was happening. We made a spreadsheet of the dates when every incident took place. Photos removed, property altered, social posts made, messages sent. It wasn't about revenge, it was about control. Clara had spent nearly 2 years taking pieces of our mother's legacy and weaving herself into them. Now she was on paper, positioned to decide how that story ended. We weren't going to let her write the last chapter, so we didn't let emotions take the lead. We followed facts. We followed the law. And step by step, we built a record strong enough to stand on its own, even if no one else in the family would stand with us. Because this wasn't about holding on to the past, it was about protecting it from being rewritten. 2 months after the will revision, I got a call from one of my mother's old colleagues. She worked closely with her on a charity project that had started during my mother's illness. Something small but meaningful that helped provide meal services to patients undergoing treatment. The colleague asked if we were involved in the new fundraiser that had popped up under the same cause. I had no idea what she was talking about. She sent me a flyer. The name had changed slightly, but the description, goals, and mission statement were lifted word for word from my mother's original documents. At the center of the flyer was Clara. Her name was written in bold above a new title, Spiritual Advocate for Growth. The event was being held under the same branding our mother used, and even the donor list was the same one we'd found in her old records. People who had donated during her final year. Clara had used all of it without telling anyone. She was calling it a modernized version of the original, now with a focus on energy wellness and rebirth. I compiled the documents, the original mission statement, logos, and correspondence from my mother's laptop, and forwarded them to my lawyer. We went over the misuse of intellectual property, and he helped draft a cease and desist letter. It was professionally worded, direct, and gave Clara a deadline to shut the fundraiser down and retract all public materials. We didn't announce anything. No posts, no emails. We wanted this done quietly, legally, and with a paper trail. Instead of responding to us, Clara gave an interview to a local magazine. She never mentioned my mother's name. She described the fundraiser as a calling, and said she was being attacked for caring too much. She claimed she had inherited a purpose and was simply continuing a tradition that had been left unfinished. The article included a photo of her lighting a candle, surrounded by inspirational quotes. Comments started rolling in from acquaintances and distant relatives. Some said they were proud of her for stepping into such an important role. Others claimed she was being unfairly judged by people stuck in the past. A few called me bitter, accusing me of holding on to grief instead of letting growth happen. They didn't know anything beyond the headlines. My father left a voicemail. He said he didn't agree with how I handled it and blamed me for disrupting something meant to heal others. He called Clara a better steward of my mother's legacy than anyone else in the family. A week later, the fundraiser was postponed. Clara announced it was due to technical delays and did not provide any further explanation. No correction was made, no public credit was given to my mother. The promotional materials quietly disappeared, but no apology followed. Then came the unexpected visit. My father showed up at my apartment. No warning, no message. I didn't open the door. I spoke through it. I told him clearly that this situation had gone beyond reconciliation. I wouldn't be attending the wedding. I wouldn't be acknowledging Clara as a parental or legal figure. I made it clear that this wasn't about jealousy or drama. It was about protecting what was real, what belonged to my mother, and refusing to let it be recast. He didn't argue. He left without raising his voice. Later, he sent one short text. I understand your stance. I still love you. Weeks passed with no contact. Then word got around that Clara had started introducing herself at local events, using our family name. She began calling herself the new face of the legacy. I heard it through a vendor my mother used to work with. He thought it was strange that someone so new was now representing something that had been built decades earlier. During that time, my sister and I finalized a project we'd been quietly building for months. We uploaded every letter, audio clip, photo, scanned recipe, and voice message from our mother to a private digital archive. It was encrypted, password protected, and hosted on a secure platform only accessible to people we trusted completely. We included video footage, handwritten journals, and even some hospital moments that had never been shared publicly. We labeled it simply, "For her, from us." That archive was our answer to everything that had been happening. It didn't erase Clara, it didn't respond to rumors or attacks. It preserved what was real, so no matter how many dinner speeches or engagement announcements came after, the truth wouldn't get lost. A few nights ago, I had dinner with an old friend, someone who works as a freelance journalist. She had followed some of what had happened bits and pieces through mutual contacts. After hearing the full story from start to finish, she asked if I'd ever thought about sharing it, not for revenge, not for attention, just to expose what can happen when a legacy gets hijacked and repurposed by someone who never helped build it. I told her I was thinking about it. Not because I wanted people to take sides, but because the truth, once lost, doesn't always find its way back on its own. And sometimes the only way to protect it is to make sure it's seen before it can be changed again. A few weeks after Clara's fundraiser had been quietly shut down, a former neighbor reached out. She had received an invite to a new event, another fundraiser, this time organized by Clara again, but now titled in my mother's actual name. It was being promoted as a tribute to a woman of strength and grace, but the theme was centered on a phrase that appeared across the invitations, continuing her legacy through me. The event flyer featured Clara's face at the top, along with photos from the previously altered family albums. My sister and I hadn't been consulted. We hadn't been asked for permission. We hadn't even been notified. I called the venue listed on the flyer, confirmed the booking, and had them email over the promotional materials. Sure enough, Clara had registered the event herself, billed it under a nonprofit entity she had recently created, and framed it as a continuation of my mother's work, but led by her. I forwarded everything to our lawyer. He drafted a cease and desist letter, addressed not only to Clara but also to the event hosts and partners. It cited unauthorized use of personal likeness, branding tied to our mother's name, and potential fraud for misrepresenting the original charity's history. The demand was clear: remove all references to our mother, cancel any use of her name, and cease all marketing connected to the family legacy. Clara didn't reply to us directly. Instead, she began sending messages through mutual family, people we hadn't heard from in months. A distant cousin wrote a public post praising Clara for her healing spirit and claiming she was being targeted for trying to unify the family. That post triggered a back and forth in the comments section. Some relatives defended her, others started tagging me and my sister, accusing us of being cold and ungrateful. Two older family members messaged my sister directly. They asked her to be the bigger person and support the fundraiser. One even said, "This is about balance, not ownership." My sister didn't respond. Instead, she forwarded both messages to our lawyer, who added them to our documentation. I decided it was time to speak with my father face to face, one final time. I invited him to a small restaurant near his office, somewhere public and neutral. He arrived looking tired and distracted. We didn't waste time. I laid out everything on the table: printouts of the event materials, screenshots of Clara's posts, copies of past legal letters, and highlighted lines from the revised will. He admitted Clara wanted to separate everything that still linked the family back to my mother. She had been encouraging him to sign over remaining personal items, journals, jewelry, handwritten cards, so they could be reframed under a shared legacy. She had already reorganized closets and packed several boxes for donation or disposal. I handed him a folder. Inside were summaries of legal statutes on intellectual property, privacy laws around likeness and legacy, and a list of everything still legally traceable to my mother's estate. I told him this wasn't about hating Clara. This was about protecting what was left. It was about boundaries, and it was about respect. I reminded him who had built the family he still stood on, who raised the children that took care of him during his grief, who started the charity, who filled that house with life. I asked him if he truly understood what he was giving away, not just objects but the meaning behind them. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He just said he needed time to think and took the folder with him. The next day, Clara made a series of vague posts online. Nothing direct, but the tone was obvious. She talked about hidden enemies, legal threats, and snakes in suits who smile to your face. She ended one post with a line about claiming space that was never truly theirs to begin with. That same evening, one of my mother's closest friends sent me something unexpected. It was a voice recording, short, less than 2 minutes. It had been saved on her phone since my mother's final weeks. In it, my mother spoke quietly about her fears. She worried that one day her name would be forgotten, that her children would be forced to defend her memory against people who never knew her. She asked for one thing: don't let them replace me. Just remember me as I was. My sister and I sat together and listened. Then we finalized the process we'd been preparing for months. We worked with our lawyer to create a formal trust in our mother's name. It included all remaining personal items, physical and digital, under legal protection. The trust locked her digital accounts, ensured her writings couldn't be republished or quoted without consent, and protected her name from use in any promotional material. Anything tied to her legacy, her image, or her voice now had a legal boundary around it. It wasn't a dramatic move. It was quiet. Paperwork, legal signatures. But it was the most permanent step we had taken so far. It meant Clara could no longer claim what wasn't hers. And for the first time in a long while, we didn't feel like we were trying to keep up with her. We had drawn a line, and this time it couldn't be crossed. A week after we finalized the trust protecting my mother's legacy, I was served notice through my lawyer. Clara had filed a legal petition, claiming she deserved partial control over items from the estate based on her status as my father's domestic partner. She cited emotional investment, shared residence, and her role in nurturing the grieving household. Her filing specifically requested access to keepsakes, photo albums, and even pieces of jewelry she claimed had been symbolically passed on. Our legal team responded the same day with certified documentation showing full ownership of all estate memorabilia traced directly to my mother's will. Her assets were never jointly held. Nothing was transferred. Her wishes were outlined clearly, and Clara had no legal claim to any of it. The court acknowledged receipt, but gave Clara a chance to contest. She didn't back down. 2 days later, Clara attempted to visit my workplace but was stopped at the lobby by building security. She walked into the lobby and attempted to approach my desk, but security intervened immediately, in front of coworkers and clients. She accused me of being heartless and vengeful. She waved printed emails, made vague claims about family betrayal, and demanded I explain why I was trying to erase her place in history. Security arrived fast and escorted her out of the building. I filed a formal incident report that afternoon, and had her added to the building's watch list to prevent future access. That night, I received a handwritten letter from my father. He apologized for what Clara did, but stated clearly that the wedding would still go forward. He said he believed Clara's intentions were good, even if her actions had been misguided, and asked us to respect his choice moving forward. The wedding was confirmed through mutual relatives. It would be held in a few weeks at a vineyard in the countryside. Neither my sister nor I was invited. We weren't surprised. We decided not to attend or respond publicly. Instead, we submitted a notarized legal statement, through our lawyer, declaring full disassociation from any decisions involving Clara or any assets she tried to claim under the family name. The document was submitted to both the probate office and estate attorney, and made clear that any attempt to alter or reassign property would be legally challenged. A few days later, I got a message from an acquaintance in publishing. Clara had been working with a ghostwriter. The book's working title was The Woman Who Raised This Family, and the description mentioned handwritten recipes, personal letters, and journal excerpts. All materials she had never been given permission to use. All stolen from boxes, backups, or altered family collections. We filed a preemptive injunction within 48 hours. Our lawyer cited multiple violations: copyright infringement, misuse of private correspondence, and unauthorized publication of estate-bound property. The publisher froze development immediately, pending full review. After that, messages started rolling in again, this time from more family members. A few said they were tired of the division. One cousin wrote, "Just let them be happy. She's not hurting anyone anymore." I replied once, listing every documented incident: the photo alterations, the removed items, the fake memorial, the fundraiser, the unauthorized book. I didn't argue, I just listed the facts. The night before the wedding, I received a voicemail from my father. He said he was going through with it but admitted, "It feels like losing something too." I didn't respond. I deleted the message. The next day, I volunteered at the local food shelter. It was something my mother and I used to do together before she got sick. I stayed for hours, helping prep meals, cleaning, organizing supplies, no cameras, no social media, just something real, something simple. Later that evening, a cousin who had attended the wedding sent me a few photos. One caught my eye. Clara was standing near the altar wearing a familiar brooch. It was one of my mother's most personal items given to her by my grandmother, passed down over generations. It had not been included in the trust documents, because we thought it had been lost years ago. Now we knew where it went. I contacted my lawyer again. We reviewed the original heirloom records, verified the brooch's chain of ownership, and initiated a broader asset protection order. The goal was to prevent any more heirlooms from slipping through the cracks, especially ones that hadn't yet been cataloged. From that point on, I began compiling a separate report, a running log of every instance of public or private misappropriation tied to Clara, photos used in promotions, altered stories posted online, family statements taken out of context. It was time-stamped, cross-referenced, and supported with documents, recordings, and screenshots. We weren't just responding anymore. We were preparing, because every step Clara took from this point forward wasn't just about personal drama, it was about legal lines, family legacy, and who had the right to speak for a woman who could no longer defend herself. We were making sure someone still could. About a month after Clara and my father's vineyard wedding, which my sister and I did not attend, Clara launched a website titled A Legacy Reimagined. It was clearly built to look professional, soft color tones, glossy photos, a mission statement in elegant font. Except the entire site was centered around Clara. There were quotes about healing, curated family values she claimed to have restored, and a full timeline of events that twisted everything to frame her as the heart of the family. My mother wasn't mentioned. Not once. There were pages with altered stories, family photos recaptioned to credit Clara for stabilizing the household, and sections titled Spiritual Matriarch and Heir to Her Grace. My sister found her name misrepresented in one caption, falsely implying her endorsement of the site. We sent it all to our lawyer immediately. A takedown demand was issued that same day, with a packet of supporting documentation, legal records, original family history timelines, photo metadata, even voice clips from our mother confirming her own words and legacy. The claim included defamation, misrepresentation, and intellectual property violations. The website went dark within 72 hours. Clara didn't stay quiet. She made a long post online accusing digital bullies of silencing a healing message and claimed the site was never meant to replace anyone. She included cryptic hashtags and a quote about rebirth through resistance. Then something happened we didn't expect. One of our mother's childhood friends, someone widely respected in the community, published a blog post. It was simple, factual, and titled What Real Legacy Looks Like. She didn't mention Clara by name. She listed accomplishments. She recounted hospital visits, fundraising milestones, moments from my mother's life that could not be faked. It was heartfelt and undeniable. That post spread fast. People started asking questions. Some local outreach projects Clara was tied to quietly removed her name. At least one event she was scheduled to speak at was canceled. For the first time in months, my father reached out, not through a forwarded message or lawyer, but directly. He asked to meet in person. No Clara, just us. We met at a small park my parents used to take us to when we were kids. He didn't bring notes or excuses. He said he didn't realize how far things had gone. He admitted he hadn't looked closely at the memorials, the fundraiser flyers, the website. He had trusted Clara to lead the way because she seemed so certain. Seeing everything documented made it impossible to ignore. He agreed to revise the will again, this time restoring my sister and me to our original roles. Clara's name would be removed from heirloom access, estate decision-making, and any historical representation of the family. 2 days later, those changes were filed. Clara didn't take it quietly. She posted publicly again, this time claiming I had torn the family apart out of jealousy and spite. She called the legal changes emotional manipulation. Her tone was different now, angrier, more defensive. But there were fewer comments this time, fewer people defending her. My father received one final warning from me. If Clara ever attempted again to access or use anything tied to our mother, digitally, legally, or symbolically, I would take immediate legal action. No more warnings. No more back and forth. She tried one last move. Clara reached out through a cousin we hadn't spoken to in over a year. The message was familiar. Claims of misunderstanding, pleas for resolution, suggestions that we meet and find common ground. This time the cousin replied to her directly. He told her what everyone else had been avoiding, that her actions weren't misunderstood. They were documented. My father quietly moved into a small apartment in a nearby town. The wedding plans, which had been set to continue with a secondary ceremony for distant relatives, were called off indefinitely. He told us the damage might be too deep to fix. For once, he wasn't asking us to forgive. He was just acknowledging what had happened. A week later, my sister and I returned to our mother's grave. We brought a framed photo of her, the one that had been removed from our old house years ago, and a printed copy of the voice message she left behind in her final weeks. We sealed both inside a weatherproof memory box and placed it at the base of the headstone. We launched the private memorial site we'd been working on quietly all this time. It holds photos, handwritten letters, scanned drawings, recipes, family videos, everything we had salvaged. It's invitation only, protected, and trusted only to those who truly knew her. There's no rewriting allowed, no edits, just truth. I'm not trying to erase Clara's existence. I'm not interested in stopping her from moving on with her life, with whoever still wants to be part of it. But I will never let her erase my mother. That line, for me, will always be final. I'm a 19-year-old guy, and for the last 3 years I was homeless. Not couch surfing or crashing temporarily, actually homeless. And the worst part is, no one in my family even noticed. I left home when I was 16. It started over something small, my stepfather yelling at me because I didn't vacuum the living room right before he got back from work. He called me disrespectful, said I was acting like I paid rent. My biological mother stepped in, not to calm things down, but to back him up. She told me straight out, if I didn't like the rules, I could leave. So I did. I packed what I could fit into a single duffel bag. Some clothes, a sketch pad, a few books. I walked out the front door thinking it was just a bluff. I figured she'd message me, or my stepfather would call it off before I got too far. I expected some kind of reaction before I even made it out of the neighborhood. Nothing. I slept in a public park for the first 3 nights. The one close to my high school where people walk their dogs during the day. At night, it got cold fast. I used my hoodie as a blanket and my bag as a pillow. I didn't sleep much. Mostly just sat there staring at passing cars and wondering which one might be someone from my family coming to find me. No one came. I thought about reaching out to friends and I tried. A couple let me stay for a night, but their parents weren't okay with it. Some made up excuses about it not being a good time. I get it now, having a homeless teenager sleeping in your house brings legal risks and questions. Still, at the time, it felt like every door was slamming shut one by one. I couldn't afford to get picked up by authorities or land in the system, so I lied. At school, I told anyone who asked that I was living with an uncle about 45 minutes away and just taking early buses. I knew how to stay invisible. I showed up early to school and showered in the gym locker rooms before the PE teacher arrived. I kept my clothes folded tight in my bag to avoid creases. I was always on time, always focused, and no one looked close enough to see past that. My teachers actually complimented me for being disciplined. They told me I was mature for my age. One even told me I'd make it far because I didn't get distracted like other kids. Not one of them noticed that I had no lunch some days, or that no one came to parent-teacher conferences. I never turned in field trip forms, I never brought back anything signed, and nobody ever asked why. After a while, I started picking up under the table jobs, mostly cleaning up after hours in diners, helping unload delivery trucks at weird times, sweeping sidewalks in front of closed stores before they opened. It paid just enough to get some food, and on rare nights, a shared motel room if I got lucky. But without legal identification or an adult to vouch for me, I couldn't apply for anything real, no food stamps, no government programs, no shelters that required intake forms. Everything had a wall in front of it, and every wall had a question I didn't have an answer for. I made it to graduation somehow. I stood in line with everyone else, wore the same cap and gown, smiled for the photos, even though no one took any of me. When they called my name, I walked across the stage. There was a polite clap from the audience, but no one stood up. No one shouted my name. No one was there. Everyone else left with their families. I walked away alone. It wasn't until I turned 19 that things started to shift. I was sitting in the back of a church basement during a free meal night, trying not to look too obvious. A volunteer came over and asked if I needed anything. I told her I didn't have ID, and that was making it hard to get a real job. She didn't judge me or ask too many questions. She just helped me fill out the paperwork. A month later, I had an official ID in my hand. The same volunteer helped me find a retail job at a local department store. Minimum wage, but legal. With that, I managed to rent a small room from an older man who lived alone. He didn't care about my background, he just wanted someone quiet who didn't bring drama or guests. I paid my rent on time, stayed out of his way, and finally had a door I could lock. Things were starting to feel stable, like I might actually build a life. Then one night, I was scrolling through social media on my break and saw a screenshot someone had reposted that made my whole body freeze. My half-sister had posted photos from her birthday, balloons, cake, the whole family standing together in the backyard I used to mow. The caption was something like grateful for another year of family unity. Family unity. That's when everything snapped into focus. They had gone on with their lives like I had never existed. No one had looked. No one had asked. I had been gone for 3 years. Homeless. Alone. And they were smiling in group photos like nothing had ever happened. That was the moment I knew I needed to start documenting the whole story. Because they sure weren't going to. The night I saw that birthday post, I didn't even finish my shift. I took my 15-minute break, stepped out to the alley behind the store, and opened the message app. I hadn't talked to my half-sister since I left home. I typed one sentence. How can you post about family unity when you watch them let me disappear? She responded within minutes. The message was short. She said they thought I was staying with someone, like it wasn't a big deal. No questions. No follow-up. Just a casual explanation, like losing track of your brother for 3 years was some kind of mix-up. I blocked her right after reading it. Not just her profile. I blocked the number too. I didn't want to risk her ever reaching out again, not even by accident. That one message told me everything I needed to know. I opened my biological mother's account next. Her profile picture hadn't changed. Still that same filtered photo with her and my stepfather smiling at a barbecue. I scrolled through her feed. Birthday photos, vacation selfies, dinner plates, all the usual stuff. Then I saw it. A post from a few months earlier with an old photo of me as a kid in a striped shirt. The caption read, "Not a day goes by that I don't miss my son." No one who misses their child disappears for 3 years without trying to find them. There were no messages, no calls. Not one person showed up to school, not one voicemail. But she posted that like it was enough. I closed the app before I smashed my phone. Later that night, after my shift, I called someone I hadn't spoken to since I left. The guy I used to ride bikes with in middle school. We weren't best friends or anything, but his family lived a couple blocks over. I asked him straight, did anyone ever ask about me after I left? He hesitated, then told me the truth. No. They all just assumed I had gone to live with some relative out of town. No one ever came around asking questions. No one knocked on doors or checked with neighbors. He said it like he was sorry, but it didn't matter anymore. I thanked him and hung up. That conversation brought back a memory I hadn't thought about in years. One night, during my first winter sleeping behind a gas station dumpster, I watched my stepfather pull in to buy smokes. I saw him walk in, wait in line, walk out, and drive off without noticing me curled up behind the bin maybe 10 feet away. I didn't even flinch. I just stayed still, heart racing, hoping he wouldn't look too closely. He didn't. Back when I still had a place to stash things, I had hidden a small plastic box behind the community center where I used to take art classes. Just random stuff, some old drawings, notes from school, a broken watch, and one of those cheap photo booth strips from a fair. I hadn't been back since I left. That weekend, I went to check. The box was still there, buried behind some weeds and covered in grime. The lid was cracked, rain had gotten in. Most of the drawings were smeared, the paper stuck together, and the watch had rusted through. But some things were still there, my name written in pencil on a class folder, a birthday card from a teacher, proof that I had existed in that house, that I had belonged to someone once. I sat behind the building with that box for over an hour. It was still dark when I got there, and the sun started coming up while I picked through the wet papers. I didn't move, just sat and let the quiet settle. And then, for the first time in years, I cried. Not loud, not angry. Just enough that I had to wipe my hands on my shirt before putting the stuff back in the box. I cleaned it out and brought it home with me. Not because it had value, but because I wanted to remember it wasn't always like this. That was the night I started writing things down. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but I needed to make a record. What happened? When? Who said what? I didn't want the memories to blur. I didn't want to look back 5 years from now and not remember why it all went the way it did. A few days later, I was talking to my manager at work about possibly moving to a closer bus line. A coworker overheard us and pulled me aside. He asked if I'd ever looked into community-based therapy. He told me there was a youth center nearby that did free sessions, no insurance needed, just drop-ins and intake interviews. I went the next day. I didn't talk much that first session, mostly just filled out paperwork and nodded a lot. But the counselor was patient. She didn't try to fix anything. She just asked questions. Basic stuff: where I lived, how I supported myself, what my plans were. In our third session, she explained something that hit me harder than I expected. She said being kicked out was not the same as leaving. That when someone tells you to go, and you go, that doesn't mean it was your decision. That was the first time I'd heard someone say it like that, out loud. In plain words, it stuck with me the whole ride home. A few weeks after starting therapy, I went back to my old high school for the first time since graduation. I wanted copies of my student records, anything that could show how disconnected I'd been from my family and still managed to get through. I didn't know what exactly I'd find, but I figured it was a good place to start. The woman at the front desk asked for my name, looked it up in the system, then told me that anything from before I turned 18 required permission from a parent or guardian. I explained that I hadn't had contact with my family since I was 16 and showed her my ID. She hesitated, then walked into the office behind her and came back with a different woman. Someone older who introduced herself as the records administrator. She asked a few quiet questions, glanced at my ID again, and then walked me through a special appeal process. She helped me fill out a form requesting access to my own records as an unaccompanied youth, using my current address, lease, and the ID I had just gotten a few months back. She also included a note vouching that I was the one requesting the information directly and had graduated from their school. A few days later, she called and told me the documents were ready. When I picked them up, I sat on the curb outside the school with the envelope. Everything was still there: report cards, attendance, and address information. But what caught my eye was the contact sheet. My file listed the same address from 3 years earlier. My mother's house, no update, no note. Nothing had changed the entire time. There were parent signature lines on multiple forms, all marked left blank or not returned. I saw empty sections where guardian approval should have been needed, for field trips, counseling sessions, even lunch program paperwork. No counselor ever flagged the fact that a student hadn't had a guardian show up to a single conference in years. There was no sign of anyone reporting anything unusual. I decided to contact my old guidance counselor. I tracked down the office number online and left a message. He called back 2 days later. At first, he struggled to remember me. Once I gave him the context and timeline, it started to come back. He apologized, said he assumed I had transferred or moved with a family member because he never got responses to his outreach. When I told him I had been homeless from 16 to 19, there was a long pause. He agreed to write a statement confirming that no one ever showed up on my behalf, and no contact was made by any adult listed on file. I picked it up in person. It was typed on school letterhead, signed and notarized by the school. After that, I started building a full timeline. I laid everything out: each address I stayed at, each job I worked, each place I slept. I scanned receipts, wrote out locations, added dates from my journals, and made a folder for therapy notes. I saved photos of street corners, old backpacks, even the plastic box I'd recovered behind the community center. While sorting through one of my older notebooks, I found a folded up paper tucked in the back. It was a list of emergency contacts written by my mother from years ago. One of the lines had a name I didn't recognize at first. Then I remembered, it was someone she once said might have been connected to my real father. I had never been given a clear answer. I was told vague things about how he wasn't around or he didn't want to be part of the picture. I typed the name into a public records database and found an address 2 cities away. Same last name, same approximate age. I didn't know if it was him, but it was the closest lead I had ever come across. I wrote a letter by hand. I didn't want it to seem like spam or some scam. I explained who I was, what I had learned, and why I was reaching out. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted to know if he remembered my mother and if there was a chance we were related. I mailed it with no return address, just an email in case he wanted to contact me. A few days after sending the letter, my landlord pulled me aside. He said he had renewed the lease paperwork and offered me a lower rate if I agreed to stay long term. He appreciated that I was quiet, cleaned up after myself, and never missed rent. I signed the new lease on the spot. With things finally stable, I looked into finishing my education. I hadn't technically dropped out, but I didn't have a full diploma either, just a certificate of completion. I found a night school nearby that offered GED prep and enrollment support. I took an assessment test and registered for the next session starting in 2 weeks. Around that time, a flyer at the youth center caught my eye. It mentioned a nonprofit that helped formerly homeless youth with adult transitions, paperwork, school support, legal aid, housing help. I visited their office the next day. They assigned me a caseworker who listened to everything, took notes, and asked if I had ever tried applying for backdated youth support. I told him I hadn't. He explained that if I could prove abandonment and lack of care before age 18, I might qualify for retroactive programs. Not just aid, but possibly legal action depending on what they found. We set a follow-up appointment and started pulling together everything I'd already documented. That was the first time someone used the word recourse in a way that didn't feel impossible. About 2 weeks after mailing that letter, I got a response in the mail. The envelope had no return address, but matched the city I sent it to. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, signed at the bottom. It was from the man I believed might be my biological father, who had gone years unaware of my existence. The tone was cautious, not cold. He said he did remember my mother, and if what I wrote was true, he'd be open to a DNA test to confirm it. He didn't want to assume anything, but he was willing to take the next step if I was. I brought the letter to my caseworker at the nonprofit. He contacted one of their partner clinics that handles family-related DNA tests for youth cases. Within 2 weeks, they had a test scheduled, one that wouldn't cost me anything. I showed up, swabbed, signed, and left. The clinic handled the rest. They said the other party would be tested separately through a local partner clinic near him. While waiting for the results, I stayed busy. I worked my usual shifts, went to therapy, and kept filling in my personal timeline. My caseworker had given me a folder to collect everything: my school documents, written statements, photos of where I used to sleep, screenshots of jobs I worked under the table, and scanned pages from my old journals. I started uploading it all to a secure drive the nonprofit helped me set up. During one of our meetings, my caseworker explained something I hadn't heard before: retroactive emancipation. Even though I was now legally an adult, they said applying for post-emancipation status could help frame my case for legal and financial support. It would create a record showing I had functionally been independent and unsupported since the age of 16, which could matter for aid programs and future claims. We contacted the school district again to check if they ever updated my guardian status or flagged anything. Nothing. My student file still listed my mother's home address with no updates and no contact notes. Not one welfare check, not one flagged form. That silence spoke louder than anything. The letter from my former guidance counselor was already on file. He had written that I'd been a responsible student, showed up on time, kept my grades steady, and never had a guardian present at any school meetings. That statement carried weight. We added it to my legal packet. Around that time, the DNA results came in. Positive match. The man I had written to was, in fact, my biological father. He emailed me directly the next day using the address I'd left in the letter. He said he was shocked. He explained that my mother had told him she had miscarried shortly after they separated. He believed her. They were never close, and he had no reason to doubt it. He never knew I existed. He asked if I'd be open to meeting in person. The nonprofit arranged a neutral meeting spot, a room at their local community center. A staff member stayed nearby in case anything went off track, but it wasn't needed. The man walked in, looked me in the eyes, and said he didn't know what to say. He brought an old photo of himself at my age. It was obvious. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. We sat for over an hour. I told him the basics: where I'd been, how long I'd been on my own, what I'd done to survive. I told him I wasn't looking for money or a place to stay. I just wanted to know the truth. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he asked if I wanted to stay in contact. I told him I was open to it, but needed space and boundaries. We exchanged numbers and agreed to start slowly. After that, I met with the nonprofit legal team again. They created a protected file where they stored everything: DNA confirmation, therapy letters, school documents, photos, timelines. The goal was to build a comprehensive case if I ever decided to move forward with a legal claim for abandonment or seek reparative aid. I didn't check my blocked list. I hadn't unblocked anyone. There were no accidental emails, and I ignored any public posts I saw through mutuals. I'd already reported and blocked what needed to stay gone. I wasn't going back to that chaos. Instead, I focused on what came next. With more pieces of my identity finally coming together, and records now backed up across secure drives, I started shifting my attention. Not just to the people who failed me, but to the systems that had made it so easy for them to disappear. The school that never flagged my absence. The social services that never asked questions. The forms that went unanswered year after year with no follow-up. I wasn't trying to fix the past, but I was done letting it get buried. With help from the nonprofit legal team, I drafted a formal request to Child Protective Services. It detailed how I had left home at 16, never returned, and had been unaccounted for through all of high school. The request asked for a full review into why no welfare check, follow-up or intervention ever happened, especially since my school had records showing complete absence of guardian involvement. At the same time, we submitted a complaint to the school district. It listed specific examples: parent signature forms left blank year after year, emergency contact numbers never answered, not a single parent-teacher conference attended. The signed statement from my former guidance counselor backed all of it up. He confirmed no adult ever responded to emails or calls, and that he had no record of a guardian making any decisions on my behalf from the time I was 16 through graduation. As that paperwork was being processed, my biological father called with a suggestion. He offered to help me move out of the shared housing arrangement and into a better place. He said he didn't want to interfere with my independence, but could co-sign a lease if I found something in my name. I started searching that week. Within a few weeks, I found a studio apartment close to both my work and the night school I had just started attending. It was small but clean, with its own bathroom and a decent lock on the door. My biological father came with me to meet the landlord and sign the paperwork as the guarantor. I covered the deposit and first month's rent myself, using savings from my job. That was the first night I slept through without waking up every hour. Not long after, the nonprofit contacted me with something unexpected. A local journalist they sometimes worked with had caught wind of my situation. She was doing a story on youth homelessness and education system failures. They asked if I'd be open to an interview. I said no at first, but after a few days I agreed to speak anonymously. No names, no faces, just facts and documents. The interview happened in a quiet office at the nonprofit's building. I brought copies of my school records, counselor's letter, and the emancipation timeline. I walked the reporter through each piece, explaining how it all added up to 3 years of silence. She didn't pressure me. She just listened and asked clear questions. 2 weeks later, the article went live on a local media site. It talked about how schools sometimes miss clear signs of neglect, and how unaccompanied minors can slip through every safety net. It didn't mention my name, but the details were specific enough that some people at the school district recognized the case. An administrator emailed the nonprofit and asked to schedule a private meeting with me. My legal team said it was likely damage control. We met with him in a neutral location, and he didn't deny the facts. He said it was regrettable that no outreach had been made, and that the system had blind spots. Then he started talking about how things could be resolved quietly and mentioned the possibility of mutual understanding. We ended the meeting there. My lawyer sent a formal notice declining further informal discussions. From that point on, all communication had to go through legal channels. With the documentation in place, we submitted the full emancipation timeline and accompanying records to the state's youth support office. It included attendance logs, guardian absence notes, journal excerpts, therapist verification, and the signed counselor statement. The goal was to establish a legal framework for abandoned minor status retroactively, something rare but possible. At the same time, my biological father helped me request my old Social Security file. When it arrived, we noticed something important. My mother had continued listing me as a dependent on tax filings for multiple years after I left. She never had custody, never provided care, but still claimed me as if she had. The nonprofit's lawyer flagged that immediately. She explained that claiming tax benefits for a child not in your custody, especially one you didn't support, could qualify as misrepresentation or fraud. She began preparing a separate file for review by the relevant financial authorities. Up until that point, I had been focused on proof, documents, records, dates, but that detail, the tax claims, brought another layer. It wasn't just neglect, it was profit off absence. I didn't expect anything personal to come from my mother at this point. No apology, no confession, and I didn't need it anymore. What I did need was accountability, not just for what happened to me, but for how easy it was for the systems around me to look away. That, finally, was starting to feel like something within reach. With everything compiled, I filed for retroactive use support and submitted a civil claim for abandonment. The packet included school documents, therapy logs, written statements, the DNA confirmation, housing records, and the proof of financial misreporting. My caseworker made sure each section was correctly labeled. My attorney reviewed it line by line before it was sent out. About a month later, I got a letter from Child Protective Services. They were opening a formal review of my case from when I left home at 16. The letter included contact info for the investigator assigned and explained that they'd begin with interviews and documentation review. My nonprofit legal team handled communication on my behalf and made sure no information slipped through the cracks. Meanwhile, my biological father agreed to participate in the process. He wrote a sworn affidavit detailing how my mother had told him she miscarried, and that he only discovered my existence recently through DNA results. The nonprofit submitted it along with the test report. It added weight to the narrative that not only was I abandoned, but that vital information was withheld from both sides. Through the nonprofit, I was introduced to a network of former homeless youth working toward degrees or trade certifications. A few of them were in college, others in training programs. One of them connected me with a counselor from a local community college that had scholarships for youth impacted by homelessness. I started the application that week. Part of the requirement was a personal statement. I wrote about the 3 years I went unaccounted for, how I kept myself afloat, finished school alone, held jobs under the table, and rebuilt from nothing. I didn't exaggerate, I just told it straight. A few days after submitting it, a former teacher from high school reached out. She had read the local article and figured out who it was about. She had always been quiet but kind, one of the few adults who never asked questions but never ignored me either. She offered to write a recommendation letter. It arrived in my email the next day. I was accepted into the part-time community college program and granted a partial scholarship. Between that and the retail job, I could afford tuition and still pay rent. I adjusted my work hours and started my first 2 evening classes that fall. At the same time, I joined a weekly support group hosted by the nonprofit. It wasn't therapy, just a place to talk with others who had survived similar things. Some had been kicked out at 15, others ran from unsafe homes. We shared resources, legal tips, and sometimes just sat in silence when words didn't come. That circle became the first real community I'd had in years. My lawyer continued building the civil case. She filed the formal tax fraud complaint with the authorities, attaching my social security data and school records as proof that I hadn't lived with or been supported by my mother for the years she claimed me. The filing triggered an audit review. A separate agency began reviewing every year she'd listed me as a dependent. Through someone else at the nonprofit, I heard that my former household was under financial stress. My stepfather had been laid off and they were behind on bills. It didn't change anything for me. I didn't respond to any of the vague public posts one of my relatives made on a shared account. Things like family sticks together or don't forget where you came from. I hadn't unblocked anyone and didn't plan to. Boundaries stayed where they were. The nonprofit's digital safety coordinator helped me take extra steps, setting email filters, creating new passwords, removing my name from old account recoveries. I updated my privacy settings on every platform and closed accounts that could be used to find me. At one support group meeting, I met someone a few years older who had gone through something similar. She'd been kicked out at 17 and later sued for damages related to abandonment and misuse benefits. She won. Her lawyer had used a combination of school absence records, guardian inactivity, and unreported housing changes. Her case became a precedent my attorney added to my file. With her story in hand and the legal foundation set, my team began preparing the next phase, filing court documents, scheduling dates, and issuing formal notifications. This wasn't just about holding people accountable anymore. It was about documenting how easy it had been for a child to disappear without anyone noticing, and making sure that couldn't happen to someone else. Each piece moved the case forward. Every form, every letter, every signed statement added weight. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally pushing back. My lawyer officially filed the civil suit against my mother, one count of child abandonment, and another for knowingly committing tax fraud by claiming me as a dependent while providing no care. The supporting file was over 100 pages long. It included my school attendance logs, tax record discrepancies, signed statements from school staff, and documentation from my therapy sessions. Every piece had been reviewed, verified, and cataloged by the nonprofit's legal team. My biological father submitted his signed affidavit and confirmed he would testify if needed. His statement included the misinformation he was given about my mother miscarrying and the DNA test that proved our relationship. He agreed to show up in court when the time came. Within a few weeks of filing, we got confirmation from the tax authority. My mother's recent tax returns had been frozen, and a full investigation had been launched into previous years of filings. She had listed me as a dependent for multiple years while I had not lived under her roof or received any support. Those filings were now under audit, and further penalties would depend on the outcome. Behind the scenes, the school board had also begun making quiet moves. After the article and the legal complaint were shared with district officials, an internal audit was launched. It focused on reporting failures, specifically how a minor could remain enrolled for years without any guardian participation, emergency contact verification, or home visits. I didn't hear anything directly, but one of the teachers still in touch with the nonprofit confirmed there were meetings happening behind closed doors. The journalist who had first written about my case contacted the nonprofit again. She had been following the updates and wanted to publish a follow-up feature, this time focused on the institutional breakdown that allowed a child to vanish without question. I agreed to participate anonymously, as I had before. The second article ran just days later. It outlined the entire timeline and included redacted quotes from my legal filing. A few days after the story went live, I got invited to speak at a youth advocacy panel hosted by a citywide nonprofit coalition. I joined the event under my first name only. My segment was short, but what I shared caught attention. I explained how I had been absent of any family support, living alone, finishing school, and hiding everything because I didn't know anyone would believe me. After the panel, a policy researcher approached me. She worked with a senator's office focused on education reform. We exchanged contact info, and a week later I was on a Zoom call with two legislative staffers. I told them what signs had been missed. No contact from guardians, unsigned forms, outdated addresses. They asked if I'd help consult on a draft bill that would require schools to trigger outreach when a student shows extended detachment from parental figures. I agreed. Meanwhile, the court set a hearing date for the civil suit. It was scheduled for the following quarter, giving my team time to prepare and build out witness coordination. The nonprofit paired me with a legal mentor, a man in his 30s who had won a similar case after being kicked out at 15. He met with me weekly, not to talk strategy, but to help with emotional preparation. He explained what the courtroom felt like, what to expect when the other side tried to downplay things, and how to stay focused on facts. My mother was formally served through her local court's process server. She didn't respond directly, but a few days later, a distant cousin's account sent a vague message to one of my social media inboxes, asking if we could talk. I reported it immediately. The nonprofit's digital security lead stepped in and added extra filters to my accounts. The message was archived and flagged. Shortly after that, her attorney contacted mine with a settlement proposal. It was minimal, an offer for a small one-time payment in exchange for dropping the suit and agreeing to keep everything confidential. My lawyer responded firmly, rejecting the proposal and stating we would continue as planned. During this time, my biological father had a session with my therapist. He asked for guidance on how to stay involved without taking over. They talked through boundaries, support styles, and what I needed most. He started checking in once a week, just short messages. No pressure. It worked. As everything moved toward trial, I realized something that hadn't fully settled in before. Keeping distance from my mother wasn't harsh. It wasn't a grudge, it was a decision that let me build the life I was supposed to have. She hadn't just failed to care for me, she had actively made it harder for me to exist safely. And now, every file we submitted, every statement collected, was the evidence of what survival had cost. The civil trial began early on a Wednesday morning. I arrived with my attorney and the legal team from the nonprofit. Everything was prepared, binders filled with labeled documents, digital backups on encrypted drives, hard copies for the court. My testimony was scheduled for the first half of the day. I walked through the entire timeline under oath. The day I left, the years I went without contact, the jobs I held, the schools I attended without a single guardian showing up. I submitted my journals, letters, school records, and verified therapy reports as supporting evidence, which had been reviewed over several prior months. When it was her turn to respond, my mother came in with only her lawyer, no witnesses, no paperwork. She sat stiff, eyes down, while her attorney fumbled through a weak defense. They tried to argue that I had chosen to leave and that no one knew where I had gone, but the facts didn't support it. The court had my school file showing I'd remained enrolled at the same address for years after I left. Her address. No one had updated anything. No one had called. No one had checked in. The judge asked how a minor could vanish from a household, stay enrolled at a public high school, and complete graduation without a single guardian attending meetings or returning calls. He asked how the school system and parental oversight had both failed. My lawyer pointed to the pattern: no emergency contact confirmations, blank signature lines, years of silence. Then, my biological father took the stand. He explained how he'd been told I never made it. He confirmed the DNA test, shared the timeline of our first contact, and submitted the signed affidavit he'd filed months earlier. He didn't make a scene. He stuck to facts. The judge asked a few questions, then thanked him for his clarity. The nonprofit legal team stayed close the entire time. One of them helped keep track of cross-examination questions, while another reviewed documents on the fly. During recess, my mother's attorney tried again, this time with a larger settlement offer. Still confidential, still without admission of guilt. I had it declined through my lawyer. No direct response, no negotiation. After final arguments, the judge recessed to deliberate. A few hours later, we were called back in. He ruled in my favor. The court found that my mother had failed to provide care, failed to maintain contact, and had improperly claimed benefits during the years she had no custody or involvement, based on evidence gathered and submitted over a long review process. She was ordered to pay damages, nothing life-changing, but enough to acknowledge what had happened. The tax fraud portion was referred to federal investigators for follow-up, beyond the court's civil scope. The ruling was described as rare, especially given the time that had passed, but the judge made it clear that accountability was not voided by delay. Within days, legal advocacy networks began discussing the case. A few reached out through the nonprofit for permission to reference it as an example of long-term structural failure. I agreed, as long as my name wasn't included. My identity stayed protected. Soon after, I received invitations to speak at 2 regional events, both focused on reforming school system response to student neglect. I accepted and shared a prepared statement with guidance from the nonprofit's public outreach coordinator. It focused on facts and policy, not personal details. A week after the ruling, the nonprofit called to tell me a financial aid foundation they worked with had approved a grant on my behalf. It was enough to cover the rest of my community college program. That meant I could drop my weekend shifts and focus on classes full-time for the next 2 semesters. A few media outlets contacted the nonprofit directly asking for interviews. Some wanted to feature the story as a larger look at youth homelessness and system failure. Others were clearly after a scandal headline. I declined every offer that included real names or photos. I didn't want revenge. I wanted awareness. One afternoon, I noticed a message request sitting in an old account inbox. It came from a name I didn't recognize, but when I checked the account history, it was clearly a cousin from my mother's side. They used a fake name, but the profile picture matched one of their old posts. I didn't open the message. I deleted it, blocked the account, and cleared the inbox. That weekend, I visited the park where I'd spent my first night sleeping outside at 16. I didn't sit. I didn't take pictures. I just stood there for a few minutes. Same bench, same tree, same corner light that flickered back then. Then I turned around and left without looking back. The case was over, but the story wasn't done. It had just entered a new chapter, one where everything I'd been through was finally recognized, not just by me, but by law. A month after the verdict, I moved into campus housing using the scholarship awarded through the nonprofit's education fund. The unit was part of a program for students with documented histories of homelessness or family estrangement. It wasn't fancy, but it was private, quiet, and mine. My name on the lease, my key, my rules. No roommates, no curfews, no one questioning why I didn't call home on weekends. Around the same time, I started a part-time internship at a nonprofit focused on child welfare and education. They placed me in their research department, where I helped review old school district data to identify patterns in youth neglect reporting failures. My role was to flag missing information, unanswered calls, unsigned documents, students with zero guardian contact for extended periods. The work was slow, but every case I marked felt like catching what had once been missed in mine. In therapy, I had a session specifically focused on how things were evolving with my biological father. We had kept a steady rhythm, brief check-ins, occasional lunch if he was in town, no pressure for more than I wanted. My therapist helped me set the boundary clearly. I would define the pace, and he would respect it. He agreed without argument. One evening, I pulled out an old notebook and started writing a draft. Not just memories, but chapters. The working title I wrote on the cover was "No One Noticed I'd Been Homeless for 3 years." I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I felt the need to document the story while the details were still sharp. I focused on what happened, who failed, and what changed. After hearing about my project, one of my professors invited me to submit a chapter to a student anthology. The theme was resilience, and she thought my voice belonged in it. I picked a section from the journal I kept during my last year of high school, the part where I was still sleeping near the gym but arriving before sunrise to shower and avoid questions. I submitted it under a pseudonym. At a youth policy conference a few weeks later, I met someone who had aged out of the foster system with no support and a nearly identical story. Different state, different system, same silence. We swapped contact info and began sharing progress updates, jobs, therapy, future plans. Knowing someone else had made it through the same fire made it easier to keep going. My work at the nonprofit was going well enough that the director called me into a meeting one Friday. She told me if I kept showing the same consistency, they would consider me for a junior policy analyst role after graduation. It wouldn't be automatic, but I'd have a direct path in the door if I wanted it. Then the bill I had consulted on with the senator's office came up for vote. It passed unanimously. The new policy would require schools to escalate any case of long-term student detachment, unverified absences, repeated unsigned forms, or unreachable guardians for intervention review. I got an invitation to attend the signing session at the state capitol. I didn't speak, just stood in the back row and watched the pen hit the paper. 2 days later, I received an email from Child Protective Services. It was from the investigator who had reviewed my original complaint. The message included a formal apology for their failure to act when I was 16, and an acknowledgement that my documentation had helped shape internal reforms. The email closed by thanking me for being part of change. Therapy ended naturally a few weeks after that. My therapist said the door was always open, but she believed I had reached a point where I could carry forward. We scheduled a final wrap-up session. No drama, just closure. On my 20th birthday, I took a volunteer shift at a local youth shelter. I helped sort donated winter supplies and spent the afternoon writing short cards for the teens who came in without family. Some were runaways, some displaced. I didn't ask questions, I just packed hygiene kits and left a card in each one. That night, I reread my old journals from the years I spent hiding. I didn't try to edit anything. I just read the pages, stacked them in order, and then placed them in a box labeled "Done Surviving." I locked it, slid it to the back of the closet, and left it there. All my legal files, school forms, medical reports, and tax documentation were backed up on an encrypted drive. I didn't check them often, but they were there, proof, if anyone ever questioned what I lived through. I spent the next morning writing messages to the people who made survival possible. The teacher who vouched for me, the caseworker who never rushed me, the landlord who gave me a chance, the therapist who never pushed too far, the nonprofit director who opened every door she could. The story didn't end with a reunion. No one hugged it out. No one came running, but it didn't need to. I didn't win because someone gave me anything back. I won because I refused to let them take it forever.